Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
It's a miracle. Dan is no longer in Minnesota. Dan is back in a warmer climate with sun shining on his face. Dan was in Minnesota and, did some miraculous things on stage, from being a props manager to talking about miracles and microscopes and all of that. So all of that has brought us to today. So happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome to the MuseCast. Hey, Dan.
Hello.
I saw you there and now I'm seeing you here.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful.
Did you? I think that was the most props I've ever managed in a sermon. So
and I want to give you your props for using those props, because I don't know if people realize it's not just a flat stage that you're dealing with. There are chords everywhere and things you have to avoid, and
levels
and
levels
and like it. That I was impressed, sir. Good job.
Yeah. Let me just add to the drama a little bit too, because those flip charts, they looked good, I thought, in the sermon. They were very precarious. I mean, one of them was like built by cavemen before Jesus, and it was just like barely hanging together. So there was a lot of things to manage, as I'm also managing the content. So I was very happy with how all that went. And I think God was present and holding the flip charts up for me. So
he was miracles all around. I tell you,
yes,
miracles all around. Okay, so today's MuseCast, I'm just gonna let people know what's gonna happen. I have had a revelation. We can call that a miracle if we want. I kind of sense that Dan has more to say on this topic.
I do.
And so, because I respect and care for my brother, I want to give him the space to do that. So today's MuseCast will be a little less back and forth, and I want you all to know that's good and okay. I had a revelation, and I feel like this is what needs to happen. And guess what? We're the producers. We don't have producers, but if we did, that's us.
Right,
So we decide what happens. So so we're going to have a summary, and then I will respond, just give some initial thoughts. But I do know that there was much that Dan most likely left out and much he could expound upon. You guys have already been reaching out with questions. He got some questions afterwards. He has questions from the Boren household. So we're going to give him a long runway to kind of nail all of that. And then he'll be at ease. He'll be good to go. And he'll feel like he did what he set out to do. So that's our plan for today.
Did you say he'll be Eddie's? At ease.
At ease.
Oh, I thought you said Eddie's. And I was like, does this have to do with Paul Eddy and the Eddy family? Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. So that's
we're booting you from the Borens to the Eddies to the Boyds to the no.
Well, that's great.
Ease. At
ease. Yes.
There
yes.
we go.
All right. Well, so this sermon this weekend, I probably was trying to do too much originally. And there was sometimes I just get really stubborn. Here's the thing. All right, I'll just say this is sort of a lament. Okay. It's hard for me. I'm like backup quarterback. I'm part of the team. I'm not the starting quarterback like Greg. I'm probably not even a quarterback. I'm kind of like maybe a tight end or something like that, like backup bench. And so it's easy for Greg, because when he gets inspired, I'm just going to add 3 more sermons to this. And that's cool. And I love it when he does that, because so often you go to churches and they're just like, this is what we're doing, and that's what we're doing. But whereas Greg, he tends to kind of go with the spirit. And this is one case where I wish that I had, I'm leaving. First of all, I'm going on a vacation, so I couldn't do it. But this is one time when I wish I could have just do 2 weeks on this. And I would have done 1 week on the first part and then another week just on consciousness. But that's what the sermon was. It was looking at the relationship between faith and science. And as I talked about science, well, let me just say this first part. Really, kind of my heart in this issue is that I see this perception that people have that faith and science are somehow like competitive with one another, and I just think that that's not how it's supposed to be. That's not how it should be. And this perceived rift between faith and science, I think, is unnecessary, and I think it hurts both faith and science. And so I talked about how did that rift come about, and then I proposed how both Christians and science people could heal that rift. And so for the church, I want to see the church celebrate science, embrace it, to make science a part of their walk with God. And because I just think if you are pursuing truth, and if that's what you claim to be, that you are moving toward truth and you're seeking truth. Well, if your truth doesn't relate at all with the real world, then it's not really worth that much. And so I just think that science is just so important. For science, I think the danger there that I would love to see science avoid is really just like getting so stuck in your method and starting to think that your method is something other than method. And as a method, the scientific method basically reduces our focus to just matter itself and what matter does. And I think that is, the more we can do that, the better our knowledge will be of the world. It's just that it's so often, you see this with the new atheists, where they're in love with the scientific method and they think that they can apply that to big questions like whether God exists or not. But when you look at the history of the scientific method, those are all questions that have been kind of intentionally left out of the method. Those are all top-down type questions. And so on the first thing is that it's not very scientific to even ask those types of questions when you look at science as it's been historically kind of contrived. But the second part of that is that the scientific method is just too short to reach some of the questions that we ask. And so I talked about, like, for instance, whether or not there's meaning in life. Why is it that we are moved by beauty? Things like faith, hope, and love. Why is there life? Why is there anything at all? And then that led me to consciousness, which is another kind of experience that we have that I don't think that the scientific method by itself can fully account for. And so I just gave what's called the unity of consciousness argument, which basically is based on this fact that our brain works with neurons, and neurons have just a bit of information. Each neuron has basically a bioelectrical signal, and somehow those individual bioelectrical signals are unified in our experience. And the jump from many little signals to that one unified experience that we have is really difficult to explain from the bottom up. And that's where I think that having a top-down, being open to top-down truths is so important. And then I just finished by saying that when you realize that every moment that you are aware, every moment that you are conscious cannot be accounted for by matter, cannot be accounted for by physical reality, then that means that every moment that you experience is, by definition, a miracle. And but it's not magic. It's just it's something that you can discover when you have all of the sources of truth, not just one or the other. When you have the top-down sources of truth and the bottom-up sources of truth, now you can understand both all of the physical things that are happening in our brain when we think, but also we can be open to the transcendent reality of ourselves because we haven't arbitrarily prejudiced ourselves against those types of top-down truths. And what that means is that means that every moment is a miracle. It also means that ourselves and our family and our neighbors, each of us are miracles. Each of us, none of us can be reduced to our physical matter, which means that personhood is more than our abilities, how good looking we are, or how ugly we are, or how tall or short, or the color of our skin, or all of those things, that doesn't really mean much toward our inherent dignity and our unsurpassable equality. And the unity of consciousness argument just gives this, I think, profound philosophical support and justification for those types of basic things about personhood that we believe, where if you only look from the bottom up, those things don't really make much sense. And once you open the door to that, now you can intelligently believe things that are really hard to believe when you're only looking from the bottom up, like the Holy Spirit and prayer and angels and demons and free will and things like that. And so that's where kind of the real payoff comes from. And Janice and Mary and Greg, they were kind of teasing me, like, you finally get to the payoff at the very, very, very end. And that's just, yeah, it is. It was a lot of work and building blocks to get to that payoff. But I just think it's so great to have such beautiful beliefs have that type of inherent deep justification. It's not just wishful thinking. If anything, it's the materialists, it's the people who are trying to apply the scientific method to all questions about life. They're the ones who are wishful thinking, because it's really hard to see inherent dignity in a person who is only made up of matter. And so, yeah, that was the sermon. What did you think of it? And also, what did your daughter think of it? Because she's been wrestling with some faith and science questions, if I remember right from last week.
Yeah. She does have questions, and she was appreciative, as was I. And she does have a question for you that I told her if we could fit it in, because I knew there was much to be said, that I would swing it your way. Okay. So of course, like I said, because I respect you and I value your mind and I value your theology and what you bring to the table, I always enjoy hearing from you. But I also value you as a brother and as a partner, that we do this show together every way. So there's many facets to which I come to the table listening to Dan Kent. And I have to say, I got a good chuckle out of your humility and the vulnerability in which you share that when you were a young believer, and I'm not going to say young in age, because I don't know when you became a believer, but like young in your faith, that you toyed with the idea seriously of God placing dinosaur bones in the ground.
Oh man.
I think that's adorable. I really do. And it could sound condescending. I don't mean it to be. I just think, but honestly, I think in a sense, now people may not reveal that about themselves, but essentially that's what some people feel like they have to do in order to make sense of what they can't make sense of in regards to faith and science. And so, Dan, you have such a great way of just being real with the folks and just sharing from your life. And I think it really helps people to like receive what you're saying. And so, so I just want to thank you for that.
It helped that Emily confessed the week before too. That helped. So
yes, she paved the way for that. Yeah. So I have started a campaign. I'll be collecting signatures for a part 2 of this sermon, because I really feel like I agree. I feel like you had so much of the building blocks to get to this meaty end. And I feel like, so petitions are being sent around, signatures are being collected. So maybe after your vacation, we can circle back to that. I am the meaning. That's where I am. You know, I'm more about the metaphysics, and but I don't poo-poo the science. I don't always fully understand. I don't have those answers. So I love that we're having the conversation, and I love that you did take the time to say, like, these two don't have to be in battle with one another. Like there is, and I love how you spoke to, like, if you want to say both sides of it, like, this is what I like to see from the church, from those who are in the faith realm. And this is what I'd like to see from those who are in the scientific realm, because you're missing out on a whole thing that I think is God ordained and breathed if you poo-poo one or the other. And so I'm thankful for you just bringing this up again, bringing this to light, digging through it. I've listened to your sermon 3 times.
Wow.
I know, Dan Kent. Because I'm still like the unity of consciousness. That's not something I'm super familiar with. And so I was really, that was interesting. And then, the artwork, you can't help but be drawn to the artwork.
Yeah, my favorite part was after the sermon. I think she was a med student, but they were studying neurons right now, and she thought that I did a great job drawing it. So I got, yeah.
And so, and I think so, and that's the part, like when you were talking about the neurons and going through all of that, like, so that's just not how my brain works. And so I was really intrigued, and I was like trying to lean into and learn some stuff, because that's what we're all about here, is asking questions and learning. And so you did that for me. And I did think that your eclipse analogy was great, with the, putting those glasses on to see something properly, but then you can't like walk around life with the glasses on, because then you're going to miss a ton of other stuff. I thought that was chef's kiss. So I'll have to say thank you, sir. And I know, and you said, like, I think one of the first things you said was, this was like a 3-hour sermon that you had to kind of whittle down.
Right.
And even beyond a 3 hours, I just know there's more. There's more. There's more. So my friend, I want to just say, what more do you want to share with us? I want to give you the runway, so to speak, just to go.
Let's just start off. I want to hear, you said your daughter had a question let's just start with that. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, she does have one of those basic, because you did mention evolution, but didn't dive, you didn't dig deep into it. And so she does, like, she's like, okay, so where do we land when it comes to evolution versus creation? And is it really is it one pitted against the other? Is there space for both to exist? And I think in her heart, she's hoping the answer is yes. And so how do you answer some of that kind of stuff? Because there are people who think, and they're like, there is no way, right? That this happened all because God said so. And then there are those who think that, well, absolutely, that's the way that it happened. And it happened in exactly the 7 days, and it happened just like this, but then it doesn't account for a bunch of things. So there's a ton of confusion and question around it all. So, that's her main thing.
Yeah. That's, I changed my mind. I'm not going to answer that. That's too hard of a question. I'm moving on. Forget that. I'll let Greg deal with that one. No, I'm kidding. It's a great question. I think, for me, I think you could be a believer and believe in young Earth creationism and all of that. And I think that if that's where you're at, that's fine. As I've looked at the evidence, and I'm pretty open on evolution, really, but like just trusting like this pretty large group of scientists who have made some pretty good cases for evolution. I'm inclined to think that evolution happened, although there's a lot of incoherent kind of timeline things even within that community, and so there's a lot of weird problems within it. I'm inclined to think that it happened, and I have to kind of read the Bible accordingly and try to figure out, well, what does Revelation mean, given that I believe this. And for me, it was 2008, and I was in Peru. This is how big this was for me. I remember exactly where I was, but I was in Peru, and I was sitting at this little pizza cafe, and I was drinking an Inca Cola, which is just like, it's what Mountain Dew wants to be, but it just can't quite, it's just that good. It's so good.
Okay.
And I'm eating this pizza, and I'm reading this book called Finding Darwin's God, I think is what it was. And he defends evolution from a Christian perspective. And at some point when I'm reading that, I realized how beautiful a God of evolution is, because our God, we talk about how, when is Jesus coming back, because it's been 2,000 years. But if you look at the God who oversees evolution, God has been waiting billions of years to have this relationship with us. And now we're finally in this incubator stage of this profound divine relationship. And for me, that was just like, now I understand what a good God is like, even if evolution is true. And in fact, and this is why I remembered it so well, because it became so emotional at just how much more beautiful that God was than a God who, made us 6,000 years ago and he's ready to go. No, this is a God who, humans are so complex and the universe is so complex that this type of relationship that we have between humans and God is something that it's like a stew that has to like simmer for a long time before you can finally get those flavors, before you can finally get that potential for the type of relationship that God wants. And so for me, I've sort of embraced evolution, but I'm still open to it. I mean, as a good scientist should be. The real issue is just rethinking, okay, what does this say about God? And what I have found is, man, it says great things about God, and I love it. There's still questions to be resolved, like, would God use evolution when there's so much suffering and pain and stuff like that? And and that's where you look at spiritual warfare and things like that, and that would take us down a rabbit trail. But so yeah, that's what I would say. I think you can absolutely embrace evolution or young earth creationism. I'm inclined to embrace evolution at this point. Yeah. With that,
I think you will calm my sweet daughter's heart. So thank you for that. Because I think in her, again, she's 14. And so she is scientifically minded. She does enjoy the sciences, but she does have faith. And so for her, she just didn't feel like it had to be an either or. She was like, why couldn't God have worked through evolution?
Right.
She's like, other things adapt and change, right. Look at the earth. And so I was just like, on my ass dance.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, yeah. And I think that's exactly right. And what's cool to me is like, okay, these are the thing, we have all of these things in the universe. And when that happens, then this thing responds like this. And when this thing responds like this, then the other thing responds like this. Even though there's an evolutionary process that happens as things jostle through the universe, there's still underlying programming that allows for those evolutions to take place. And that's where science can't reach that. Science can't explain why. It's kind of like you can't mathematically prove that God doesn't exist without borrowing God's calculator to do it. And that's kind of what I would say about that. Yeah.
The last thing I will say, and then it is yours, really and truly, is that to me, and maybe I'm just simple, but to me, thinking this way doesn't limit God. Actually, to me, it increases my faith, my belief in him. It increases, if you want to say, his power and his, to me, it makes him more of who he is and not less. So it doesn't steal from his thunder to think this way, because it's actually him responding to more variables and more things that happen instead of just, I said, so that's it.
Right.
I said is powerful. I'm not saying it's not, but I think there is a thing about, free will and in spiritual warfare and all that stuff. So anyway, it makes it more powerful in my mind.
Well, I think that's really well said. And just to echo that, I think you're right. I mean, we believe that God is the creator. Science is the method that we use to find out, how did he do it? Like what was the process that it happened? And we got to be open-minded about that. We have to be open to how that's going to go. Now, to think that Moses would have known all of the quantum physics and stuff, I mean, that's just a ridiculous expectation to put on Moses for a point that he wasn't even trying to make. So that's my perspective on it. Well, let me answer a couple questions that I've had sent in. The first one, really well stated by David. He emailed me, and let me see if I can summarize this, because I feel like this is just an absolute crime that I'm going to limit this, because he wrote this question so well. But he just basically wonders, like, okay, I talk about unity of consciousness as this thing that matter cannot account for. And yet he just responds by saying, well, look at how how material we are, though. Like, that unity of consciousness is fine, but it's gone when you go to sleep. And it's in your emotions, and everything you do is profoundly different when you're starving. And so it's like, even though the matter might not be able to account for it, man, it doesn't really seem like it's all that distinct from the body. And I didn't really talk much about the relationship between consciousness and the body. And that was one of the things I had to cut. But I would say this, I think you're absolutely right. And I love what C.S. Lewis, and I can't remember the book. I got to find out what book it was, but he talked about how we are embodied, and how just because matter can't account for us, and just because we have something that surpasses matter, that doesn't mean that we're not inherently bodies, because I think that we are. I think if we didn't have bodies, we wouldn't be worth very much. In fact, Jesus, when he was resurrected in a body. He wasn't just this floating orb of light. He was a body. And in fact, that's what Lewis talks about in this book. He talks about how it wouldn't make sense if we were just essences floating in space, because how could one essence communicate to another? We would at least need a hand so we could, wave to the other, and the other person would need some type of receptacle to be able to see that hand waving. And at some point you end up with a body as you go down that path. And so we are absolutely embodied, and I think we need to take that seriously. My point is that we can get so lost in the fact that our experiences are so tightly connected to our bodies that we miss the fact that the body doesn't account for everything. There is something there that transcends the physical, and the reason why I think that is so important is because that fact is what allows us to say, these two people are unsurpassably equal in dignity and worth, even though this person might have all sorts of physical problems, and this person might be a physical Olympic specimen who's also a PhD, Nobel Prize winning laureate, whatever. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. These two people are unsurpassably equal. Well, if you just look at the physical body, that makes no sense. It's just like wishful thinking. But when you realize that underneath that body, there's something that the matter can't account for that surpasses it, now suddenly you see, oh, they are unsurpassably equal, even though physically they are profoundly different. And so yes, David, really great question. You also have another question, which I will respond to in the email. The other response that I get, I think I can't remember who originally sent it in, but I had a few people send me this, some of this work by I think Metzinger is his name, and he's one of these people who thinks that this unity of consciousness is an illusion, and he tends to think that our sense of ourselves and this idea that we have personal agency and free will, all of that is an illusion. And it bothers me because the people who make this claim tend to be the most verbose. They tend to write the longest arguments, which is all evidence of agency. How do you build an argument without having agency? I don't know. So it's kind of like saying that it's kind of like having a debate with somebody who doesn't think that humans can reason. And yet here they are building all of these arguments telling me that humans can't reason. But that's the perspective, is that it's an illusion. And they'll base things like on little kind of ways that our brains can be duped. Like, for instance, if you have you have your hand, and then if there's a fake hand right next to it, and somebody takes a brush and brushes both hands, and then stops brushing your hand but keeps brushing the other, you'll feel that brushing on your hand because your brain has now identified with that fake hand. And so these are ways that your brain can be tricked, and they'll say, agency, it's just an illusion. And in which case I say, no, the hand is an illusion. My agency being duped, there's still something there that's being duped. There's still something that's being fooled, and that is not an illusion. The awareness of being duped can't be an illusion, is what I would say about that. That's my opinion, and there's more to it than that. But then let me see what time it is. Okay, I'll just say one more thing, and then we'll go to nugget time. I wanted to do because there was hardly any Bible verses in this sermon, and sometimes that's okay, because we're really looking at the reasons why people are leaving the faith, and people who are leaving the faith don't really care what the Bible says. That's what I found. And so, but I did have this discussion from 1 Timothy 1:4, where the Apostle Paul warns Timothy to watch out for people who use endless genealogies to make their arguments. So if they're arguing against Jesus, or if they're arguing for a different Messiah or the importance of a king, they'll look to some sacred lineage or sacred genealogy and say, see, this person is qualified, this person is justified, this person comes from the right lineage. And back then in the first century, those genealogies, they had like this inherent kind of built-in credibility. Like if you could point it out on a genealogy, people would go, oh, it's on the genealogy. Okay, this is an important point that you're making. Now, we don't really care about genealogies anymore in our modern world, but science is sort of our new genealogy. Science, if you say, oh, it's proven by science, well, now you have like this inherent credibility. And so I just thought that was really interesting, and I didn't have time to really get into it, but I encourage people to take a look at that. And let me see if there's if I have room for just a point on that. Yeah, I guess that's what I would say about that.
You have room, Dan. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, let me see. I guess here's what I would say about it is, Paul talked about the endless genealogies, and if I'm right, if science is sort of like this inherent credibility like genealogies had, it's funny how there's just this endless nature to it as well. Like, for instance, if you want to study, let's say you want to study neurobiology. Like, I want to study the neurons in the brain, some of the stuff I was talking about in the sermon. That's cool, but you have to read, to catch up on the literature, you have to read 60,000 articles, journal articles on neurobiology per year, which means if you want to catch up over the last 10 years, that's 600,000 articles. I mean, talk about endless genealogies. It takes you half a day just to read one of these things, let alone 60,000. If you want to specialize, because that's just way too many, let's just say you want to look at the neurobiology of and nutrition of obesity. Okay, great. That's still 100 journal articles a day are published on this topic alone. And so there is just this endless sort of genealogy about it, which is why we're in this just bizarro world right now where, food ideologies are so important to people. And you see people, they all have their own ideologies about food. And each of them has this wheelbarrow full of science that they wheel around to show everybody, aha, see, this is scientific. And it's that credibility again. And so you end up with people with like keto diets and whole food plant-based diets and, intermittent fasting and low carb diets and low fat diets and all these things. And even though they say opposite things of one another, everybody has science to support their perspective. And that to me is just, that's the endlessness of the endless genealogies. There's you can't use science only from the bottom up. You need some top-down ways of making sense of which of this science is good science and which of this is bad science. And so that's, I guess, what I would say about that.
That's good, Dan. Again, I really think that we need another sermon. We need a part 2, maybe even a part 3. We just do. I think, and maybe this will lead into my nugget. Maybe this is a question for you. We'll just see. This is kind of where I am with it. I really loved what you had to say about, is it bacon?
Yeah.
Not the food.
Right.
Not the food, because I don't eat that. But I think, when he said, you kind of just said, basically you're paraphrasing. He's like, when we are asking these questions, like, why is the sky thundering? Oh, where is this water and the sky coming? And people just respond, oh, that's God, that's God, that's God. Like, I think we have to humbly respect people's curiosity. So if you're on the faith side, humbly respect people's curiosity and know that their curiosity, their question asking isn't undermining your faith. Like, it's not a battle. And for those on the scientific end who are doing the digging and who are asking those questions, when someone just maybe doesn't have the answers, but just says, I just believe because I do, let that be okay as well. Like their faith, their lack of needing an answer to that particular situation or that particular question does not undermine your logic, your thinking, your intelligence, or your ability to ask questions. There is a room for all of us at God's table. And so that is my encouragement. I don't know if it's an oversimplification of everything that we're talking about, but that's just kind of, that's just where I am with all of this.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And I love that encouragement. I think that's right. And yeah, because I believe that we should be more scientific as a body. We should be more scientific. We should celebrate science, and I think that we should be kind of return to that time when people were inspired by our love of science. I would love to see, but that doesn't mean that everybody in the church has to become scientists and put on their lab coats and whatever. And so I think that's exactly right, and I like that thought. So
I think it's all expressions of God's wonder, honestly. If you think of the minds who they dig in and come up with hypothesis and they test things out and ask questions and test more things out, like thank God, like wow, look at God. Look at God.
That's great,
right? Like, and for those who are like, you know what, I maybe don't understand that, or I don't have questions about that, but I just believe, well, look at God, look at God is just so wonderful.
Shawna, if I do a follow-up sermon, that's what it's going to be called. Look at God.
Look at God. Perfect.
That's awesome.
All right, Dan. So I think we are going to end this time today together before you are off on vacation with a expanded nugget from you.
All right. Do you have a nugget?
I'm going to, if I did, it would just be kind of reiterating what I just said. Okay. So I'm going to let that be my nugget, my bow. There's my dance to go with it. And now
I just want you to know that you did not let me get away with that last week. So just because you are sort of the host of the show, this is an abuse of power. This is an abuse of power.
I'm deferring to you, Dan. I'm wanting you to have all the space you need to say what you need to say. Plus, let's be real. You're going to be gone for the next 2 weeks. So I'm going to be juggling this and figuring things out. So,
well, okay. Last time you brought in my theological hero and mentor. So I was talking to Barbara, or I think it's Barbara and my mom. And I'm like, and they were wondering, well, who's she going to have on with her? And I said, well, knowing Shawna, it's going to be like Bob Dylan or something like that. And so, I'm looking forward to seeing who you have.
I already have them lined up. I've got the folks lined up, so I'm gonna let you be surprised. We'll see if you tune in from the cruise ship. Wherever you are.
Yeah. Well, hey, so here's my nugget, and this is just the second thing. It was the second thing that I wanted the church to do as part of my last will and testament. I want the church to do this, and I want the church to be involved in science, because I think that the scientific community needs the church. And I have given a lot of reasons, just the fact that you have this abundance of science and they're supporting contradictory things, which means we need some top-down kind of way of understanding what good science and what bad science is. And I really believe that one of the ways that the enemy kind of fights against people is by leveraging these things that have easy credibility, like genealogies and science, and using that against people. And so I really believe that fighting against bad science is just a terribly missed opportunity to do really powerful spiritual warfare. And so I would love to see the church do more science and do more rooting out of bad science. And it's funny because I've sort of started this collection of bad science, and to just give some examples. And I was going to share these, but I just didn't have time on Sunday. But like, for instance, I have this one research that says, eating candy bars helps boys concentrate. That's the headline. Being a peanut M&M addict, I was very intrigued by this.
You're like, yes,
please. This is great. Now, first of all, let me just note that this is sponsored or funded by the Mars Candy Corporation. So let me just say that. And shocker, it found out that candy bars are good for boys. And so that's suspicious. But then when you actually look at the scientific research, and this is in the Journal of Physiology and Behavior. So this isn't some, backwoods sort of journal. This is a primary journal. This is a big journal. And what they did is they took 21 boys, about 10 years old. They had them fast overnight. So they were really hungry and they didn't feed them breakfast. And then later in the morning, the boys were given either a candy bar or a beverage that didn't have any calories. And shocker, the kid who got some calories ended up concentrating better than the kid who got no calories. And so the real research is that calories are better than no calories, but it doesn't say that. It says candy bars are good for concentration. That's bad science. It's a manipulative heading, and it was published into all sorts of different, newspapers. Look at this, candy's good for you. And then I have one here, sponsored by the Meat Council, saying that eating meat is healthier than eating tofu. When tofu is injected with lard. I kid you not. They compared eating meat to eating tofu when they've injected the tofu with lard. And but it doesn't say that in the heading. It just says the meat is healthier than tofu. And there's another one here that I have that's sponsored by the Dairy Council, that says that cheese is better than the vegan alternative Daiya, which is a product of vegan cheese. And I don't think that Daiya is necessarily healthy for you. But what's bad is that they compared it to Daiya with a cup of palm oil. So they had to, kind of play with the scale. So, but they don't say that in the heading. Again, you have to really look down into the research to see that that's what's going on. And all you see is the heading and you think cheese is good for you. And it's not. It contributes to so many different, heart disease and diabetes and osteoporosis and stuff like that. So, and then, I have another one, the research for, an antidepressant, I think it was Paxil, where they have this successful finding where they found that the drug helped with like 25 people who were depressed, and it gave them a statistically significant boost in mood compared to a placebo. And that research was legitimate. What's not shown is that was the 115th time they did that study. And it was only discovered that this was the 115th time because of the Freedom of Information Act that was passed, and people were allowed to look at, all of the information about this study. And so, which means if you look at 115, now you're looking at like 2,500 patients, and now having 20 of them show a statistical improvement is not really all that impressive. And so just stuff like that, where, if we're not part of this, corporations, institutions, politicians, principalities and powers, hucksters, so many forces are trying to leverage this easy credibility to get people to live and act how they want them to live and act. And if Christians are just like, we're all about faith, not science, and we're not part of that, we're missing out on this opportunity to do important spiritual warfare. Yeah. That is my nugget. I guess that's my nugget. I love it.
And to me, it's just like, man, this is why I feel like God needs his creation, his people, his followers, his believers in every sector of the world, so that we can influence and we can, bring that kingdom element into it. So I love that you went through some of those things. We need good science. We do. We need good science. And I will just say and end with this: God does not expect us nor want us to divorce our heart from our mind. Like, that is not what he's asking for us. So let's not do that of one another. Like, we need our heart and our mind to work together in unity. So
that is your nugget right there. That counts. So
there you go. See? All right, you guys. I just want to say that Dan was really passionate about giving you guys this message, and I'm glad that he did. I'm glad that he made it. I'm going to just peel back the curtain a little bit, and I'm going to let you know, you guys, just how badly he wanted you to hear this sermon.
Yes.
After we finished recording last week, and he was like, seriously, Shawna, if, cause we were having an awful storm up here, and it was, maybe not going to be super safe for Dan to be traveling. He said, if something were to happen, I need this sermon to be played. I need you to make sure, like, I don't want like this service where people are talking about like what they remember about me. Play this sermon.
Yeah, that's right.
This sermon needs to be heard. So thankfully Dan didn't have to perish in order for us to hear it. So I'm glad.
Well, and I appreciate that. And, for me, it really was like when I discovered this unity of consciousness argument, and a lot of people don't get it. And like I said, it's something you have to meditate on. You really have to sit with it for a while. But it's just been something that I've come back to again and again and again. And it just grounds me that, there really is something to all of these fantastic realities that the Bible talks about that you can't get to when you're only focused on the bottom up. And I just, I would feel really bad if other people didn't have an opportunity to meditate on some of those same ideas, because it's just been so helpful for me. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dan. Well-deserved time off for you coming up. You and Barb have a great time, and we'll see you. We'll see you when you get back. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you in the chat later. Thanks for your engagement, your questions, just like digging at this stuff. It's really good. We so appreciate you all. Have a wonderful week. Take care.
Yep. Thanks for letting me dominate.